You are muted, Kelly.
All right, let's try that again. Unmuted myself and then remuted myself. Thank you all for being here with us today. My name is Kelly Groudon. I am a prevention educator at Prevail. I have been working at Prevail since 2015 in the prevention arena. That entails working in schools all around Hamilton County and other spaces in our community, getting to talk about how we prevent violence from happening in the first place. I'm excited to be here with you today alongside Bailey Toksdorf, of course. We also want to take a second to recognize that February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness and Prevention Month. So this is perfect timing for this discussion. We are amping up our efforts to reach teens in particular and the people who care for teens, whether you're a parent or an educator or a community member who just wants to make things better for our youth in the future. So thank you all for being here. Bailey?
Thank you, Kelly. As Kelly mentioned, my name is Bailey Toksdorf. I am one half of the prevention team, and we are going to be diving into healthy relationships today, how you can be supportive as a parent, and hopefully giving you some tidbits of information that are helpful, especially centering around how are we talking about these things, especially in front of the youth in our life. So we're going to get rolling. Make sure my PowerPoint is working here. So I always start off all of my healthy relationship presentations talking about some statistics. And this is the same whether I'm in middle school or presenting to adults. And this is really just to help paint a picture that these things are happening. They're happening in Indiana. They are happening in Hamilton County, and they're happening in our schools. We know this for a fact because we are seeing a statistic from the CDC mentions that 1 in 3 teens will end up in an emotionally abusive relationship before the time they graduate high school. So again, that 1 in 3 number is astronomical, and we know just from that number alone that these things are happening everywhere. This is a nationally recognized issue and something that, again, isn't to be spoken about lightly. These next 2 statistics are actually pulled directly from Indiana, and they are collected by the Indiana Youth Institute. And they say that 1 in 10 teens experience physical dating violence, while 1 in 10 experience sexual dating violence. So again, incredibly high numbers here. And these are, again, Indiana statistics. So really diving into how this issue looks here, right here at home in Indiana. These next 2, specifically this next one, I think a lot of times we go into schools, we get questions from parents, from teachers, from students of, okay, great, we're learning about these things, but why now? And realistically, it is never too early to have these conversations. But the reason why we are really hard hitting and very adamant about getting into those middle schools is because violent behavior oftentimes begins in 6th to 12th grade. So we are starting to see some of that harmful, more abusive behavior start to display in youth, again, anywhere between 6th and 12th grade, which makes sense, especially when we're looking at those statistics that are telling us that, majority of these unhealthy relationships are going to happen before the graduation of high school. This last statistic I always mention is, I think, a huge reason why I continue to do the work that I do, probably the same for Kelly, is because 33% of teens who are in an abusive relationship ever ended up telling anyone about that abuse. So again, there is work to be done, yes, as a prevention educator, as a safe person in Hamilton County for our youth. But I hope that this statistic also speaks to you as educators, as parents, as people who have youth in their life that they are mentoring, that they are teaching, that they are parenting, or being a guardian of. Because again, we want that number to lower, right? We want teens to feel safe in Hamilton County, in their schools, around their adults, to talk about these things and to share when something isn't going quite right. So we're just going to build on some education here to get us rolling. And I don't think we can go any further without talking about the different types of abuse that there are. When we think about education, not only for yourself, this is really education for our youth as well, how we can assist them. And we can't do that if we're not even sure what types of abuse there are. So getting started, of course, there's physical abuse. I think that this is, I don't want to say the most obvious, but I think the one that people lean on and are the most aware of. And a lot of that is because these are the things we're seeing in the songs we listen to, and the video games we play, in the media that we consume. And these are the stories that are oftentimes highlighted. So physical abuse is going to look like any hitting, punching, slapping, choking, grabbing, kicking, or shoving. I always pause here. I am a lifelong learner. You kind of have to be in this role, which I'm proud of. But I recently took a training that was specifically about choking. And I always knew the severity of it, but I do think it's worth mentioning, especially here, right? Especially as we're learning ways how to better support our youth, that choking piece is incredibly dangerous. That probably goes without being said. But I just recently learned through this training that I took a couple weeks ago that if there is any sort of choking in a violent or unhealthy relationship, the severity and the intensity and the odds that somebody ends up severely injured or worse increases by 86% as soon as there is any type of choking. So yes, physical abuse is not okay, not good. But again, really wanting to focus on that choking part because it is something to look for and take seriously immediately at any mention of choking. We have verbal and emotional abuse. So this looks like any insults or put downs. This could be like nitpicking or name calling, humiliating somebody, whether that be in front of peers or in public. This could be using threats, either to get somebody to do something or to stop them from doing something, but really, again, using those threats as a form of control. Next is very fitting. We have control, and control can look like a lot of different things. It could be telling somebody how to dress, what to eat, who they can hang out with, who they can talk to, what they can do with their free time. Any type of control is going to fall in that verbal and emotional abuse. We also have accusations. So accusing somebody over and over, maybe that's cheating, right? When there is no ground to stand on, or accusing somebody of something that they are not doing, fixating on that. But then also threats of suicide. And I always pause here because suicide, especially in teens, but really in everybody, is incredibly serious, yes. But when we are using threats of suicide to control somebody, to manipulate them, to get them to do something or not do something, that's when that falls under that verbal and emotional abuse. We have sexual abuse. This is going to be violating consent. We're going to talk a little bit about consent in just a moment here. But again, violating what you feel comfortable with and what you have said yes or no to. Okay, pressuring or forcing you to do anything that you're not comfortable doing. And this can include a number of things. It could be unwanted kissing or touching. It could be sexting, or even restricting somebody's access to birth control. That sexual abuse is, I kind of use the word umbrella term. It's a really big umbrella term for a lot of harm that happens, again, through that sexual lens. This could even be derogatory name calling, catcalling, making jokes, right, that are maybe sexually informed, but are harming other people in that way. And then we also have digital. This one is huge, especially when we talk about youth, how to keep youth safe and away from that digital abuse. So first off, it looks like, or could look like, threatening texts or emails or posts on social media. So anything threatening that is, happening through a device or on a device. It could be hacking somebody's private accounts, finding out their passcodes, learning their emails, picking up their phone and getting onto that device, looking up those things. It could even be going through somebody's text messages, which brings me to my next point here. Frequently looking through somebody's phone or messages, again, monitoring what is going on at that device. Who are they talking to on Instagram or on TikTok? What posts are they liking? Who are they in communication with? This also could look like constantly calling or texting to check in or to check up on you. So those are a couple different examples of that digital abuse, and things to look out for when we're thinking about what do these different types of abuse actually look like and what do they mean. Did you have anything to add to that, Kelly?
Thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to remember to unmute myself again. Yeah, I think you did a thorough job covering all of that, Bailey. I do want to kind of note that as we're talking about teen relationships, that digital abuse is incredibly rampant, and that's one of the things that I think we especially want to focus on as we're talking about teen dating violence this month, and what that looks like and how to combat that and how to recognize that. It's difficult when our kids are constantly on their devices for so many different reasons. But we also want to be looking for those red flags. Like, is your child really afraid to miss a phone call or really afraid to miss a text and not be able to respond immediately to their partner? There's a big difference between, hey, I'm having fun, keeping my snap streak going with somebody, and oh my gosh, if I don't answer this call right now, my partner's going to kill me, or they're going to be so mad, or they're going to be outraged. And so that digital abuse is something a lot of us don't really have a lot of experience with. We haven't grown up with it like our kids have. It keeps us in constant contact with our potential abusers, and it's something that we want to be very alert for as people who care about young people.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I appreciate that. Kelly's got the mom lens, so always super helpful, especially in this setting here. So next we are going to talk about the relationship spectrum. This one is, I think, incredibly helpful in understanding that no relationship is black and white. And what I mean by that is that, not all horribly abusive relationships are going to be abusive 24/7 or all of the time. Even the healthiest of relationships are not going to be healthy 100% or 24/7, right? There are going to be different sprinkles in from this relationship spectrum. So really important to kind of understand. And this is always a tool we bring into middle schools and high schools as well, kind of talking on, let's look at this relationship spectrum. Where are the relationships in my life lying on this spectrum? And I am talking anywhere from dating relationships to friendships to relationships with family members. So focusing in on that healthy, right? Some healthy qualities mean that both you and your partner, so both people in that relationship, are communicating in a healthy way. There's respect, there is trust and honesty, there is equality, so an equal balance. Enjoying personal time away from each other. I really like to highlight that one with our youth. It's not talked about enough, I don't think. And again, really important to have your own identity in your own space away from those relationships. Making mutual choices. So having that voice to, again, have that autonomy to make choices for yourself and what is best for you. And then having this economic and financial partnership. When we're thinking about the opposite end of that spectrum, what does abusive relationship looks like? These are going to be, again, where maybe those different pieces of those types of abuse we just talked about are going to be relevant. But it really looks like when one partner is communicating in a way that is either hurtful or threatening. So again, talking about that emotional or verbal abuse piece would be using threats and communicating in a harmful way. This could be mistreatment of a partner, accusing the other of cheating when it's untrue, completely denying that their actions are abusive, or using that term gaslighting, right? Either denying that it happened at all or denying that their actions are abusive or that that abuse even occurred. We're coming back to that word control, right? Controlling, again, what somebody's wearing, what they're eating, who they're talking to, how they're spending their free time. But then also isolating their partner from others. So while these are all things that I think qualify pieces of an abusive relationship or can qualify pieces of an abusive relationship, I really want to focus on that isolation piece. When I talk about isolation, I do think a lot of times people go to, oh, like they're completely separate, right? Isolation from family and friends. But oftentimes, those warning signs can be very subtle and hard to see, both for the person in that abusive relationship and even for people witnessing that abusive relationship. Again, whether that's friends or family members, parents. Um, so a lot of times that can start off, again, very almost sugar coated, right? Hey, we didn't get to spend any time together this week. I really would love if you bailed on your friends on Saturday and we spent alone time together. Right? These are things, again, warning signs that can maybe sound harmless, but are something to keep an eye on. And something to watch as well is, how is that time being spent? Do I now have a child who used to be very involved with their friends who now isn't seeing their friends as much? I'm not hearing as much about those friends. These could all be indicators that isolation could maybe be becoming a play in that relationship. And the reason I bring this up is because, just in my experience working with youth and what statistics are showing us, is that this is an incredibly common statistic, or an incredibly common part of an abusive relationship. And that is in both teens and adults. So I think worth pulling out on that a little bit. So I want to focus on that healthy end of the relationship quality, because we're here today talking about healthy relationships. So let's focus on that communication piece first. I oftentimes say that communication is my favorite healthy relationship quality. And that is because it is so incredibly important. Yes, it is important in our own relationships, but when I'm thinking about, adults in youth life, I think about how we can be a model for that. How can we lead by example? So healthy communication looks like active listening, listening to listen, right? Not listening to respond. We don't always have to have the right thing to say or the right response to somebody, but just being sure that we're actively listening, especially when it comes to disclosures. Are we having a hard conversation? Is our teen or a youth in our life telling us something that's going on with them? We want to make sure that we are, again, focus on their story and what they are saying, not as much about, am I going to say the right thing after? Using I statements. This is something I think we've been taught since kindergarten, but it really is a very important part of communication, and it can really help as we are conversating with somebody, right? We don't want somebody to get defensive. And when we step away from using I statements, I think there is more room for that, like, defensiveness or me versus you. But instead, using I statements around what is going on, what are you feeling, and what is happening for you. Communication needs to be clear. If we have communication that is confusing or not clear and concise, there's a lot of room left for assumptions. There's a lot of room left for communication that is, again, lacking, and that is confusing. We don't want to be communicating in a way that isn't clear, isn't concise. We want whoever we're talking to understand what we're saying. There should be room to ask questions. Again, I think just opening a space for communication that feels safe, where we are holding space for each other. That means that there should be room to ask questions if that communication isn't clear, and doing so without, again, getting defensive, but understanding that we are here to communicate with each other. And sometimes question needs to be answered or things need to be explained again. There's never anything wrong with that. I think going into communication, assuming good intentions is also a really great piece to highlight on how can we model this for the people in our life. So not assuming that people are coming in to attack, to get upset, or to bring us down, right? Just coming to a place where we're two people communicating, and we're coming from a good place. I love this one. Observing nonverbal communication, right? There is, yes, communication is verbal. It's two people communicating with one another, but there is a lot to say about what our nonverbals are communicating. What is the face? What does our face look like, right? Are we making a face where maybe we look confused or we're shutting down? What is our body language saying, right? Are we facing that person and open to them, or are we now hunched over and turned away, right? Those are going to be really big indicators as how is this communication going? And again, just really that's something I think can be very impactful to teach. How can we teach observing nonverbal communication to the people in our life? And first, that's leading by example, but we can also use real life examples as well. Um, Communication needs to be able to have the space to cool down. There are some people, and oftentimes, right, people benefit and can save a lot of future hassle and future arguing if there is space to cool down, right? Healthy communication is not going to happen if the both people who are communicating are escalated and are heightened and are getting defensive. So I think it can take a lot to acknowledge, hey, maybe I need space to cool down. But again, something really important to model, and that's something we can even do with our kids. Right? If I'm in a situation where maybe I'm heightened, maybe I had a hard day at work, if I walk in that door and my child or whoever's at home with me is trying to communicate, and I can just then communicate to say, hey, I need a moment, right? I need some space to cool down. I need 5 minutes, 10 minutes to take care of me. And then I can come back to this conversation. Again, just a really, really great thing that is very easy, I think, to model in our own homes. And then acknowledging that communication is a process. It's going to ebb and flow. There are going to be times where communication feels like it's lacking, where maybe communication is happening in a way that is unhealthy or maybe even harmful. And that is okay, right? To understand again that communication is a process. When we follow all these other bullet points that I see on the screen here, these are going to kind of again have us lean into those ebbs and flows. Hopefully will tell us based on nonverbals, based on what we need in the moment to cool down, to do what we need in order to keep that communication healthy going forward. Anything to add to this one, Kelly?
Yeah, as far as communication goes, I mean, it's such an essential piece of any relationship. And if we allow ourselves to kind of dive into communicating about our needs, our wants, our problems, how our partner has upset us, anything like that, without allowing ourselves to de-escalate, it's much more likely that we're going to come out as saying hurtful things or things that we regret or things that we don't intend to say, right? And I feel like as we're thinking about healthy communication, it's one of the biggest challenges for all of us. I mean, I know even, doing this professionally, I have to kind of catch myself sometimes and really try to practice those healthy communication skills, right? This is not like a one and done thing where we just teach this once to our kids. It's something that we want to reiterate. It's something that we want to model, and it's something that we want to encourage them to practice in any relationship, whether that's a dating relationship with their partner, whether that's with their friends, whether that's within your household. All of those things are all of those are great contexts to really think about how we're communicating and how we demonstrate respect for the person that we're talking with as well.
Next, we're just going to kind of go through two more areas of modeling a healthy relationship. And part of that is setting boundaries. So boundaries are really here to help us define what we're comfortable with and how we would like to be treated. I think about boundaries as either like a white picket fence, right? Or drawing a line in the sand. When you cross that line, you cross that fence, those are going to be things that you're comfortable with, that you're enthusiastic about, that you're ready for. But when we take a step back, those are things that maybe our gut is telling us, yep, this doesn't feel right. Or, I'm not enthusiastic about that, or I'm not yet ready to do that, whatever that may be. And I think setting boundaries is an incredibly important thing, again, to model for the people in our lives when it comes to having and sustaining healthy relationships. So, in order to lead by example, we need to be able to model and set those boundaries, but then also make sure that we're modeling the respect of boundaries. And that starts in our home. I oftentimes think about something I was told years ago that really sticks with me. Boundaries are for us, and we are not necessarily responsible. I shouldn't say necessarily, we're not responsible for how our boundaries make somebody else feel. Because sometimes boundaries can make people upset. We are saying something or doing something to now protect us, and maybe people aren't used to that, or have never had a boundary set, or may think, well, now I'm not having as much access to this person. And so that's something I always try to teach our youth as well, is that these boundaries are for us. And although they might upset somebody or create some emotions in somebody else, there still needs to be respect of those boundaries. There should never be any threats or pressuring to push those boundaries in any way, shape, or form. So I think setting those boundaries at home, right? Making sure that we're communicating, even if it's something small, like, hey, I am feeling like I don't want to hug today, but I'll take a high five, right? Or respecting boundaries when somebody in your life is setting them, right? I also want to focus in on this concept of boundaries versus rules. Kelly and I are in schools all day, every day. And it is so common for us to hear things like, well, my boundary is, I don't want my partner to talk to this person or to talk to their ex. Or my boundary is I don't want my partner to follow that person on social media. And we really want to step away from that language, because boundaries are supposed to be healthy. They're supposed to complement these healthy relationships and be something that continues to keep that line of communication open in, again, a healthy manner. So again, instead of rules, again, boundaries are for us. We are not creating rules for somebody else to abide by. We are creating boundaries for ourselves and what keeps us healthy and comfortable. I think as well, another thing that is really great to touch on here is the fact that boundaries can change, which makes sense, right? Sometimes we get to know somebody a little bit more, and that boundary wall that we have, or that boundary fence that we have, might start to sink down a little lower out of comfort, out of getting to know somebody more. But also just simply the fact that we are humans and we are always evolving and we are always growing. There are going to be boundary shifts just based off of who we are as a person and where we are at now in life. I say all the time, right, that think about boundaries that you may have had as you began a relationship in your life, whether that is somebody that you are dating or married to. How have those boundaries shifted and changed throughout? And I think that's another really great thing to model and to talk about as well, is that it's okay, if our boundaries don't match up, there still needs to be respect in that. And then also, again, that boundaries are always okay to change.
I want to think a little bit as well about how we are modeling, setting, and communicating and respecting boundaries in our home. I think about how essential boundaries are to a healthy relationship or a healthy dating relationship, right? To me, that's one of the biggest green flags is this person who is willing to ask about your boundaries and demonstrate respect for that, right? We're not pressuring our partner to change their boundaries. We are not trying to push our luck. We're not trying to sneak past our boundary. We're, being very clear in respecting our partner's boundaries when we're doing that. It's so essential to create that expectation for your kids. I have a 4-year-old daughter, and a lot of people think, 4, you gotta, you gotta tell her what she's gotta do. You gotta, what parent says goes and kids don't get a say. And a lot of us have kind of grown up in that atmosphere, right? Where kids words and actions don't matter. Unfortunately, that often leads to teens and adults who believe their boundaries don't matter either, right? And so in our home, we practice a lot with setting examples, right? So if my daughter says she doesn't want her feet tickled, even though she laughs and giggles and shrieks and all of that fun stuff when we tickle her feet, we want to respect that boundary. We want to say, hey, okay, you set your line that you don't want that done. And if we tickle your feet, you're going to step away, right? And that really kind of sets that standard that she gets to expect the people in her life to respect her boundaries, right? It may be a silly little thing to you today, but it really sets them up to learn that boundaries are there for a reason. And we need to expect the people around us to follow our boundaries, right? And then conversely to respect other people's boundaries as well. That's something we model quite a bit, or we attempt to model quite a bit in our home. If my daughter's melting down, she's in a bad mood, and I say like, hey, I can see you're upset, but I don't, it's not okay for you to use hurtful language towards me. I'm going to step away until you cool down, right? That's a boundary that I'm setting. If you use hurtful language, I'm stepping away. Okay. And so she gets to kind of see that there's that boundary drawn there, that I've stated my boundary, I've communicated that. I can recognize her emotions and her feelings, and I can validate that, and I can still hold my boundary, right? The other piece to that is that boundaries are about our behavior, right? My boundary isn't, you don't get to do this. My boundary is, if you do X, I'm going to Y, right? And that's a really important distinction to make for our kids, so we can recognize how we're in control of our own actions in our relationships. Boundaries are not about controlling your partner. As Bailey said, boundaries are for us. Okay, boundaries dictate our comfort zone, and the only person's behavior we can control is our own. Okay, and so we want to ensure that we are setting our kids up for success with that, in modeling boundaries, modeling healthy boundaries, okay, respecting other people's boundaries regularly, right, and helping our kids realize the importance of boundaries, both for themselves and for other people around them.
Thank you, Kelly. I think perfectly goes right after boundaries is this concept and starting to talk about consent and how this is a crucial part of any healthy relationship, right? Even people who have been together, 50 plus years, consent is, again, incredibly important. And what consent is an agreement or permission expressed through affirmative voluntary words or actions that are mutually understandable to all parties involved, right? So this is basically saying that consent needs to be clear, it needs to be concise, it needs to be an ongoing conversation, and it needs to be respected, much like boundaries. So consent can only be expressed through an enthusiastic yes. And this is for, I think a lot of times people hear the word consent and they automatically pair it with sexual activity, where yes, consent is extremely needed in a healthy relationship when it comes to people who are sexually active. But consent is also something that we can start teaching as young as, right, Kelly's daughter's age, 4. Right. Respecting that consent, listening when our children, when the people in our lives are saying, I don't want this right now. And that can even be, right, something like a hug. I think about in a conversation I always hear floating around and see on social media around the holidays is, like this consent of, if we have children in our life who are like, nope, I don't want to give Auntie Jean or Uncle Joe a hug at Christmas, right? That's consent, right? They're saying, no, that's not what I want to do with my body. And again, I use that example because it's out there, it's being talked about. But again, that respect for the people in our life and the consent and boundaries that they hold. So consent can be given for a specific sexual act at a specific time, but it can be withdrawn at any time. And again, it could be sexual act, it could be a different act, but again, something that is being done to your body. It cannot be coerced or compelled by a threat or force. So again, if there is consent that isn't happening, right? Somebody doesn't want to give a hug, doesn't want to kiss, doesn't want to be sexually involved, there should be respect to that. There should be no anger, no force, no threats, or nothing manipulating the other person to feel guilty for, right? Or to revoke that consent that they gave. Consent cannot be given by someone who, for any reason, cannot understand the sexual situation occurring. So this could mean people who are under the legal age. It could mean people who are asleep or unconscious or are not sober, right? Or are impaired through the effects of drugs or alcohol. So again, these are the things that, again, people cannot give consent if they are any of these things. And that is really, I think, important to speak on as well. And we're going to show a video in just a moment that I think does a really good job of kind of laying this out there, breaking this down for both adults and youth. And consent cannot be assumed. I think oftentimes, especially in those relationships where maybe they have been together a while, there's some comfortability, there might be some assumptions on consent, right? Or to say, well, they said yes to that act on Sunday, so they must mean that that's okay today, right? Or next month. But again, based on silence, the absence of no or stop, right? That is not consent. And the existence, as I mentioned, as a prior or current relationship or prior sexual activity is not consent, right? So just because somebody sent a nude or somebody kissed somebody or somebody had sex with another, again, that does not give consent for those acts in the future. It needs to be something that's revisited and is an ongoing conversation. So again, I love Kelly's example of this idea again that we can listen and respect these things, even in 4-year-olds, right? We're going to listen, respect that, and that is going to teach them that okay, the people in my life are respecting the consent that I'm giving or not giving, and that is what I deserve in a healthy relationship.
I think one of the other things that we see quite a bit with teens in particular is this idea that if we consent to one thing, then we're consenting to other things as well, right? And we really need to nip that thought in the bud. You know, a lot of times we'll see teens who, you know, everybody knows they had a crush on so-and-so. So when that person forced them to have sex, they must have wanted it, right? Because they really like that person, or everybody saw you flirting with them, everybody saw you making out with them, you know. And so we make the assumption that that consent to other acts is there, and that's really unfair. I think one of the best things that we can do as parents is helping our kids understand that you can consent to one thing without consenting to other activities, right? Just because our partner is excited, just because our partner is aroused, just because our partner, you know, is pushing our boundaries, we don't have to say yes. And anything past that point that we consent to is assault, right? We get to say yes or no all the way down that line, right? And so I think it's crucial for our kids to understand that just because they flirt with somebody, just because they dance with somebody at the party, you know, just because they make out with somebody, doesn't mean they're consenting to anything else beyond that.
Thank you, Kelly. I am going to stop sharing and get up our video, so bear with me for just a moment as I get my ducks in a row here.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of
These videos, Sharon, always, always messes with me here. All right. I just want to take a moment and make sure that I have this ready.
Looks like you're good to go.
Listen to. Perfect. All right.
Of initiating sex. If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they go, "Oh my God, I would love a cup of tea. Thank you." Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no thank you, then don't make them tea at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, "Yes, please. That's kind of you." And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, "Do you want tea?" because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it going, "But you wanted tea last week." Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, "But you wanted tea last night." But if you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea.
I think one of the things that that video does such a great job of illustrating is the shift from the idea that no means no to anything other than an enthusiastic yes means no. If you're my age, like you grew up hearing no means no, and that's fine. But we also need to recognize that, I don't know, or maybe, or I'm not sure, or not answering, those all mean no too. Right. And that definition or our cultural understanding of consent has really kind of shifted away from that no means no model to recognize that consent needs to meet all of these criteria: the affirmative, the voluntary, the understandable, the sober, right, in order to be valid. Right. And we want to understand that to help protect our kids from being victimized, of course, right, from being assaulted. We want them to understand what consent means. So if they do experience a violation of their consent, that they can understand that that really is a violation, right? Like if they hooked up with somebody when they were drunk, for example. And we want to make sure our kids understand consent because we want to protect them from becoming perpetrators too, right? I mean, how many stories do we see in the news of somebody at a frat party and people were drunk and it was one person is saying it was just a hookup and the other person is saying it's assault, right? We want to be sure that our kids understand what consent means so they are not violating somebody, right? And so they can ensure that whatever actions they are taking really are consensual, right? And that things like that person is too drunk really means, you know, they don't have consent.
Thank you, Kelly.
So we want to kind of shift our perspective a little bit here as we kind of understand more about what healthy relationships look like. We need to recognize the importance of our roles as caregivers in protecting our kids from dating violence in particular. Okay. Bailey shared with us some pretty alarming statistics earlier about the frequency of dating violence among teens. Okay. And it's also really alarming to me that so many parents are completely oblivious to this stuff, right? So you all have a great leg up just being here today. But we know, statistically speaking, 45% of parents have not discussed dating relationships with their kids in the last year, right? And so that's a pretty huge number. The main reasons given for that include that they believe their kids are too young, they're not sure what to say, or that their children will learn about relationships through their own experiences, right? I want to kind of address each of those real quickly. Kids are not too young, right? Your kids are learning and hearing way more than you think they are in school, in the media that they consume, on the bus, from their friends, online. Even if you are very diligent about monitoring your child's screen time and things along those lines, this stuff is all around us, right? The ideas that we develop about what a relationship is supposed to look like come from all directions, right? Bailey mentioned earlier that abuse tends to start between 6th and 12th grade, right? And so that's a pretty big window. But another statistic that I want to share is that over 20% of kids between the ages of 11 and 14 say their friends are victims of teen dating violence or of dating violence. Okay? Over half of kids in that same age group say their friends have experienced verbal abuse from their partners. And 1 out of 3 7th grade boys and 1 out of 4 7th grade girls that are in relationships report experiencing physical violence. Okay, those are 7th graders. They're what, 12 years old? That is terrifying. So if you think your kids are too young to learn about healthy relationships, they are not. Right? And even if you don't want to give that dating lens to it, right? I can understand the discomfort of exposing our children to information that we feel is too grown for them. I can feel that discomfort around sexualizing our children too early, right? We want to let them keep their innocence. We want to let them keep their happiness, all of that, right? But we can learn about healthy relationship skills. We can learn about boundaries. We can learn about consent. We can learn about communication without ever bringing in a discussion of sex, okay? We can ask for consent to have a hug. We can have boundaries over who we have physical contact with. We can have boundaries over how people speak to us, right? These are all things that we can bring in extremely early. The idea that kids are going to learn about relationships through experience kind of alarms me, right? It's kind of this idea of, you know, they'll figure it out. And I don't think we want to leave our kids flounder with things like that. Dating violence has serious consequences for young people, including increased occurrences of anxiety, depression, eating disorders, substance use disorders, suicidal ideations, chronic physical illness, all kinds of different things, right? And so I think we all want to protect our kids from those things, okay? And one of the ways that we do that is by having conversations about healthy relationships with them. A lot of parents aren't sure what to say, and the good news for you is that we're going to walk you through a couple of those things today. Okay. Just a couple other stats. Over 81% of parents don't know that dating violence among teenagers is an issue, oftentimes because we're assuming our kids are too young to be experiencing this. Okay. In addition, Over half of parents surveyed cannot correctly identify warning signs of dating violence. So all of those great things that Bailey shared earlier about what abuse looks like, a lot of parents aren't recognizing that as abuse, right? And so it's hard to teach our kids what a healthy relationship looks like or what abuse looks like if we can't identify it ourselves. And finally, less than a third of teens who have experienced abuse in their relationship confide in their parents, right? And so it's essential that we're making ourselves a safe space, right? And that's true for educators and other caregivers as well, right? If kids aren't comfortable going to their parents, we want to make sure that they do have a safe adult that they can talk to and turn to for advice. Bailey, if you'll pop that forward one. Okay. So how do we help? How do we help our kids, right? We know this is a scary issue. We know it's a serious issue that has a lot of consequences. So what can we all do, right? Like, what can all of us do to increase those protective factors for our kids, our own children, and for the kids around us that we care about? We can talk early and often. As we said, it's never too early to start teaching these ideas about healthy relationships to your kids. It's also not a one and done thing. Okay, be sure to be revisiting this conversation frequently, right? And it doesn't have to be a lecture. It doesn't have to be a big scary thing. It can be as simple as, hey, how are things going with so-and-so? Okay, it can be, maybe your kid isn't dating yet, right? And so it can be, hey, tell me about your thoughts on relationships. What should that look like? Or what would you want in somebody that you're dating? Right? Even if your kid isn't dating, they have thoughts about what relationships look like. Okay? And we want to recognize that and make sure that they have those ideas of what a healthy relationship should be. Okay, imagine your child's perspective. I think what they're thinking, we don't want to lecture at them. It's easy to kind of recite this stuff, but we want to also kind of think about their perspective and how they might feel about these things based on the behavior of their peers, based on the media they consume, based on the models in their own home and their own lives, all of those kinds of things. Okay. We want to be sure that we are talking to our kids in no pressure spaces, right? We don't want to corner them. We don't want to talk to them in front of a whole bunch of other people. We don't want to bug them when they're busy and they're studying for finals or they've got a big game coming up or any of those kinds of things, right? We want to look for opportunities for just low pressure, private spaces. Driving in the car is a great one, right? It's private, it's contained. And perhaps one of kids' favorite things about that is that they don't have to look at you, right? You're going to be focused on the road. And so they don't feel as intimidated as if you're having a face-to-face conversation. Also, be sure when you're having these conversations that you are not distracted. Put away your phone, okay? Make sure you have quiet time with your kid. You can look for relevant examples from media or other surroundings. If somebody is experiencing something, if you see an unhealthy relationship on the TV show you're watching, if you see a story in the news, it's a great opportunity to see where your kid is at, right? What are their thoughts about that? You want to tell the whole truth, even if it's hard. You know what, maybe you can admit, I really need to work on my behavior as far as setting boundaries. Or, I know sometimes when we communicate, I don't always practice the healthiest communication skills. Sometimes I get really, escalated. I get really mad and then I say things I don't mean, right? So let's acknowledge our own shortcomings as well and recognize those things. Check in frequently with your kids, see how things are going. How are their friends treating them? How is their partner treating them? All of those important check-ins. Okay, listen without judgment, listen without accusations. Okay, things like, oh, you know better, are not helpful here. Okay. Help your child recognize those warning signs if you're saying them. If you want to say like, hey, I heard the way your partner was talking to you on the phone the other day, and it seemed a little aggressive, or like, I don't like the language they were using. How do you feel about that? Okay, and help your kids look out for those red flags. Okay, if you believe your child or a child you care about is experiencing abuse, believe them. That's a major obstacle for so many victims, is the fear that nobody will believe them. Okay, and so if your kid is coming to you, if your kid is sharing that they're not so sure about something, okay, listen to them and believe them. Give support without judgment. Okay, we're not here to place blame. We're not here to say, well, you shouldn't have gotten yourself into this situation. We want to validate their feelings and concerns. And we want to focus on behaviors, not people. Recognize that your kids may still have strong feelings for their partners, even if they're causing harm, right? And that can be really hard to wrap your head around. It can be really challenging not to say, you know, hey, you need to break up with that person, or, you know, this isn't okay, or they're a jerk, or they're a bad influence, or anything like that. Okay, tell them the behaviors that you're seeing that are concerning to you. And finally, make a safety plan together. Think about how you can help your child reduce harm. Okay, whether they are staying with their partner, whether they are wanting to break up with that person. Think through ways that you can help reduce the potential for harm to be caused. Okay, whether that is like maybe that's breaking up via text instead of in person, for example. Okay, so I want to just kind of take a couple seconds to allow for that to kind of sit in and soak in. And if you have questions, we would love to be able to address those. Please feel free to share either out loud if you want to unmute yourself, or share in the chat. That's a great option as well. And we'd be happy to answer those questions for you.
I do not see any questions in the chat. If you all have questions, like they said, go ahead and throw it in the chat or in the Q&A feature. But in the meantime, I want to thank Prevail for being partners with CCS. They're always a great resource, and we appreciate everything that they do to help us in educating our staff and community.
Thank you, Terry.
I'm not seeing anything, so I think you might be okay.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you all for being here with us this week. Prevail is here to support you and your kiddos and your students, so please feel free to reach out if there's anything we can do for you.
Thank you.